Please welcome Skift Advisory Senior Director of Strategy, Greg Klassen.
On August 12th this year, a day that could well prove to be the busiest day of travel the world has ever seen, more international visitors crossing borders, was the same day that John Oliver went on a rant in Hawaii, lamenting the challenges facing Hawaiians, the great people of Hawaii, and blaming it mostly on tourism. Now, we shared some of that blame with wealthy landowners, and tourism shared some of that blame with other divisions as well. Sorry, this got ahead of me. Shared some of those with those other players. Tourism got mostly to blame. Fires on Maui, yep, tourism. Loss of Hawaiian identity and culture, yes, that was blamed on tourism. Water scarcity, crop failure, agricultural failure, tourism, housing shortages, and food insecurity, that too was blamed on tourism. And while we know that tourism can, and we know that tourism must do better, where was the counter-argument of tourism? Tourism makes up 25% of Hawaii's economy. Where and how can we do better? But the problem is that we did not have a response from the tourism industry. Nobody to defend tourism, no counter-argument about all the good things that tourism did, and it makes us wonder if now is the time that we have to concede, sorry, this isn't clicking, that tourism needs a new PR agency. Now, my name is Greg Klassen, and I've been in the business of tourism for quite a long time. I was the CEO of Destination Canada, but for the last 10 years, I've been working with over 100 destinations as senior advisor at Skift Advisory to help destinations determine and identify their unique competitive advantages. And what I've seen is that tourism indeed is on a precipice. As Julia Buckley, who is a CNN journalist, said, it feels like this is the year that tourism turned nasty. And how we respond this year to the challenges facing tourism and the media challenges and the messages that are facing tourism will perhaps define how tourism is going to play out in the coming years. Will it be in our remit to determine and follow tourism, or will it be in the hands of governments and residents at the same time? But it's really important for us to note that tourism has indeed dropped the ball. We and tourism have been addicted to growth. Our only metrics are more. More full planes, more full restaurants, more full hotels, looking at increasing rates of ARTMM, that kind of thing in tourism is particularly challenging for us. And residents have actually borne the brunt of that. Tourism's been addicted to growth at almost any cost. And with those full planes, tourism provided jobs, economic security, tax funds, and community amenities for Hawaii and other destinations, but tourism forgot its relationship with its resident hosts. And while tourism's bad news and impact made the front pages of many world's news sources, any of tourism's good was relegated to page 5 of the travel section on Saturdays. So we went from once a nice industry of cultural understanding, and I love the thing that we heard today from intrepid James Thornton. He said, tourism creates positive change through tourism, through intrepid. There's nothing nicer that we can say about tourism than the idea of cultural interchange and positive change. Tourism enabled us to experience firsthand, to learn, to understand, to relax, to share memories, become active and have fun at the same time. Hosts were proud to welcome guests in the old days. But we've turned about tourism. That was a decade ago. That nice industry was growing at an alarming rate. Equally alarming growth of demand for cruising, aging baby boomers, millennials with the aspirations to travel, global middle-class growth, low-cost air carriers, cheaper trips, cheaper opportunities for us to travel, and boy, did we ever travel. I look at the TSA. I heard today, and I think I heard this right, that the 10 busiest days of the TSA were in the last 4 months of this year. Travelers in the United States are growing at 4 times the spend than the average consumer good. So instead of buying stainless steel appliances, people are taking trips instead. No wonder that travel has gone so far, and no wonder it's grown so much, but it's become one of the most vilified industries in the world. Increase in international flights from 1.5 billion to 3.5 billion in 20 years, and enter the social media and the space, the TikToks, the influencers who are telling us different places to go, different places to visit, and creating a lot of too many people in too small a space for that period of time. Now, make no mistake about it, I am on team tourism. I think tourism is one of the greatest growth engines. It is the industry that has had the greatest growth opportunities. It's contributed significantly to foreign exchange revenues. It's increased the eradication of some poverty in many countries all around the world. And many, many countries can participate in tourism, and they do. I think most of the world is blessed with tourism's natural resources and are welcome to participate. It is a powerhouse industry. Except the tourism for good messages are being replaced with tourism for bad messages. Captured in that word, over-tourism, and again, first coined by Skift in 2016, to encompass this overcrowding of places and destinations, at the same time creating all of this challenge. In fact, that word has now become so changed and so challenged to exemplify all the ills and all the bads of tourism that in 2018, Skift, the word that they coined in 2016, said, yeah, let's dump that word. It's not become the same definition as it had been before. And how that word has strayed. Now the word over-tourism become an increasingly powerful name and word to galvanize the anti-tourism lobby groups. Residents, activists, and other voters who are influencing governments with their anti-tourism, over-tourism messages. And governments are responding with knee-jerk reactions, writing incomplete legislation to increasingly regulate the industry and placate that type of negativity. But I mean, we get it. We hear these stories about Venice. We hear these stories about Barcelona. We hear those stories that are taking the lion's share of the negative press on tourism. But make no mistake about it, those are not isolated incidents in those particular cities. What you might not be hearing is other cities the city called Valencia and the Faroe Islands, for instance, are also seeing their lion's share of over-tourism messages. And just in case you think it's isolated even to those European cities, you'll know in the place that I come from in Canada, over-tourism has been blamed for killing a precious turtle in a northern community that sees very, very few tourists. So over-tourism's name itself has been galvanizing together to account for all the things that are bad about tourism, and we get no tourism good messages. We continue to double down on it. This is the messages that we send out to our industry that says best year ever, best year since 2019. Australia, Saudi Arabia, France, Albania, Turkey, best years ever, and we communicate that broadly and effectively, but without any context. No wonder we're galvanizing the anti-tourism lobby and getting them to tell our story that tends to be front-page headlines, again, relegating the good news stuff to the back. So how do we fix this? Who's in charge of fixing this? What are the implications of letting governments, media, and residents and activists control our narrative, control our tourism message? Well, there's those that might argue that governments are best to fix tourism, that the tourism and its private sector shareholders are just concerned about growth and concerned about making a return on their investments. But I'd suggest that the government is notoriously poor at regulating businesses. With their blunt instruments of policy, incomplete legislation, buoyed by anti-tourism lobby groups and resident groups of voters, tourism risks being either severely overregulated, shut down, or significantly curtailed. And almost any of those government interventions that I've seen on tourism have been muted at best and ineffective. And this will result in a tourism industry perhaps defined by bureaucrats and not necessarily defined by industry experts. So let's take the state of Colorado, for instance. On November 8th, it's going to go to a local ballot and ask its residents how they should spend tourism dollars, the DMF funds, the hotel taxes that they're getting. Should they spend it on more tourism, or should they be spending it on things like daycare and housing? What do you think the answer is going to be of those residents? They're going to go for daycare and housing. Now, you could argue that daycare and housing are really important initiatives to help with our tourism labor force. And those are important initiatives, but isn't it better that tourism makes that decision, and not governments, and not residents, and of course not voters. So does our industry really want those big decisions that might happen in the next few months and in the next few years to be in the hands of residents and governments or in the hands of tourism? Again, let's remind ourselves that tourism has indeed dropped the ball. Our growth metrics define our performance and our bonuses, with too few of us bonused on supporting better management of tourism. But management of tourism is exactly what we need to do. Doesn't necessarily mean less revenue, it just means better dispersion of our visitors across geographies and across seasons. It means focusing on a different yield of traveler to try to bring them in during different periods of time. It means taking some of those initiatives that we see, some of them are good, some of them are yet to be determined whether they're good, in places like Barcelona, eliminating or reducing the number of hotels, in places like Venice, charging fees for you to come into the city, and even in places like Amsterdam that are saying, you know what, just don't come. Don't come, at least in the summertime. And those are good and recent examples, but tourism itself needs to come up with better examples, better metrics, better KPIs in order for us to tell our own story about what to do next. So what are the three things that we need to do? What are the three actions for tourism's future? The first one is that we need to acknowledge that we cannot sustain unfettered growth. It needs to recognize that in our industry, in order to sustain it for our future that we must collectively recognize that way too many visitors over way too short a period of time is going to be harmful for the future sustainable growth of our industry. Again, doesn't mean it's less revenue for us. It just means that we need to be smarter and assign KPIs to develop better management practices for tourism in order to make sure that we are focusing and not overwhelming our locals and with visitors. Number two, we need to better communicate tourism's impressive growth. Yes, it's important for us to talk to ourselves within our industry, talk to our industry members that support us, and say, tourism's growth is important for us. But we need to temper that growth with efforts that we're making in order to disperse our visitors, demonstrate management of our tourism entities, the work that we need to do with our hotel partners, our airline partners, our experience partners, all through the ecosystem itself, and make sure that we're communicating better about the impressive growth, but demonstrating the management tools that we are using in order to make tourism more sustainable within those communities. And the third and final thing that we need to do is a strategic coordination with all of our international organizations and our national organizations. I know every one of you destination managers right now are doing exceptional things in order to support that. We don't hear about those. We don't hear about those collectively. We continue to communicate broadly about tourism's impressive performance, but we need to hear those good news stories, and we need to coordinate those stories and tell a better story so that we can counter all of the negative anti-tourism lobby stories that we're getting right now that are harming our industry and harming it into the future. So I started with that question, does tourism need a new PR agency? And I guess you can probably guess my answer to that question. But my answer is really a resounding yes. But there's some caveats to that yes. The first is definitely yes, we need to dig ourselves out of the negative media spiral and retake control of our own narrative. Own the story of tourism. Own the good news story that we can share about tourism, all the awesome things that it does, all the awesome things that you've heard Intrepid talk about what they can do. That's part and parcel of our collective tourism story. First, we recognize that in order to help that PR be true, we need to take a more managed approach to destinations centered around the residents. In effect, what we need is more managers and fewer marketers. Thank you.